I'm really excited to be here. I want to thank the Chamber. I want to thank Cretic for having me. I got to say, I speak all over the country, all over the world. I've been in, I think, 6 or 7 states in the last couple weeks. But I'm really excited to be here because, and the organizers did not know this before they booked me, but my mom is actually from Harrisburg. Isn't that cool? Round of applause for my mom. Yeah. My mom is from Harrisburg, and in fact, before moving to Florida, where I was born and raised, my family was in, I believe, the central PA area for like 200 years, which is really cool, since the 1750s, 1760s. So 100 years ago, when this was all starting, it's possible, maybe, that one of my relatives was here taking part. So if there's like a genealogist, we'll do some work afterwards and figure out if someone was here. Anyway, as you heard, my name is Parrish DuDell. I'm an entrepreneur, a speaker, and I wrote the book for Shark Tank, which is why people like to talk to me today. It's the official business book for the show, and so far, it came out in November. It's been doing really well, and it was a real honor to get to write that book. But tonight, I'm going to talk to you about some of the lessons I've learned working with people like the Sharks and some of the other amazing folks I've had the opportunity to work with, some of the stories that I've told via writing and speaking. But first, I want to start with my own story, because I think that's important for anybody who's a storyteller, which, if you're in business, is all of us these days. So I want to tell you about how I became an entrepreneur, because it's a very untraditional path. Oh, look at that. It's already changed. That's me, by the way. I was 4. That's as cute as I've ever been. I peaked at 4, which is a shame, but I still have this picture, so that's nice. That was me when I was 4 years old. And when I was 4, I started singing, like what you were doing over there, wherever our singer is. I started singing, and as it turned out, I was a pretty decent singer, which is strange because I had a really awful speech impediment that I was born with, and no one thought I was ever going to be like much of a singer. But I could actually sing on key, and it sounded pleasant, and people seemed to like it, and that led to acting. And I started to really love singing and acting. And for the next 20 years, I know you're not going to believe it, but 4 to 24, that was all I did. Literally, that was my entire identity. By the time I graduated high school, I'd been in over 100 shows. I got accepted to, let's click this, perfect, the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music, which is a super competitive school for theater and musical theater. And I was sort of living my dream. I went to college there. They have boards every year. You could get cut. A third of my class got cut. I was kept. I graduated. I moved to New York. I got an agent. I started working all over the country. And I was really, really super miserable. Like the most, here's miserable, and I was like there. I was so unhappy. And what I realized, I started to feel like this in sophomore year of college, is that for so long, and I'm sure people can relate to this, for so long, I was doing what I was doing because I had always done it, not because it inspired me or excited me. It was just something I did. It was who I was, so I couldn't leave it. And I really wrestled with that. I struggled. How am I going to get out of this? This is all I've ever known, literally since I was 4. I have no other skills. My degree, I'm going to get your credibility back later. My degree's in musical theater. All right, so just know that. I'll earn your credibility back, I promise. But I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what I was going to do or where I was going to go, and I couldn't leave. And then this happened. That's me in a unitard, by the way. So now you've seen it all. So that's an embarrassing picture, isn't it? So I did this show, I did The Wizard of Oz, I was on tour for a while with that, and I was 24, and this was like the lowest depth of unhappiness. And I caught myself wearing that outfit in a mirror backstage, and just like that, I said, it's over, I'm done, I'm cashing out, I'm going home. And I called my agent, and I said, when my contract's up, I'm coming home and I'm done. And they're like, okay, sure, we hear that all the time. I flew back to New York City, I left my agency, and that was it. Over, done, 20 years. And that was really scary, because when all you've ever done is one thing, and then you have to go out into the New York City job market and try to do something else, really, really tough. But luckily, this was back in 2007. I realize I should have a slide to go over this, because it's still sitting there. This was back in 2007, and digital media was just sort of becoming a relevant, credible thing. A lot of people didn't want jobs in digital media. They didn't think that it was going to go anywhere. They were wrong, clearly. And so I was able to get a sort of senior-level job at this new site called ecorazzi.com that at the time was getting a couple thousand hits a month. It wasn't any big deal. But I joined in 2007, and over the next couple years, we grew to a couple million hits a month. We were a leading player in sort of the green conversation online, and there was just a ton of opportunity that came with that. Time magazine recognized it. I started to get asked to speak everywhere. Our target market were millennials, and we were really attracting them, and so everyone wanted to know, how were we talking to millennials? What were we saying? How do you create content? And through that, I started to actually get a real career. I started to speak all over the place, consult with huge companies, write for various publications. Eventually, American Express reached out, and they were starting the first charge card geared towards millennials. And they said, hey, you know millennials. You want to come talk with us? Maybe, consult for a month or so. That ended up lasting for a year, and I got to help them build the first charge card geared towards millennials. It was awesome, a great experience, and a great company to work with. But I went back to the site after that, and I realized it was time to go. I had pretty much gone as far as I could, and I needed to move on. And just as that was happening, Seth Godin, how many people know Seth Godin? Like everyone, right? Some people? Google Seth Godin, y'all. Come on. All right. So Seth Godin's a great marketing guy, and he was starting a publishing company that was powered by Amazon.com. It was a business publishing label all about getting new ideas out there in different ways and trying to get sort of this digital publishing thing to really start. We did traditional books and digital. Worked with him, and that was an incredible experience. And eventually GE reached out and said, hey, we need an editor-in-chief for ecomagination.com, which is their sustainable innovation site. Any interest? I said, yeah, that sounds cool. So I went over to GE, and I worked with them for a year building that out, creating something really great, but eventually knew that it was time for me to do my own thing. I've always championed the entrepreneur. I've always had little side businesses, but I'd never really had a company, my own sort of thing. And so I left and I started Race and Vine in early 2012. And it was a consulting firm specializing in things I'd done for so many years prior, content marketing, millennials primarily. And it did really well. My first year was a huge success. It was profitable. I hired a ton of freelancers, getting work all over the place. But I started to realize that consulting wasn't the only thing I wanted to do, and that I missed writing. I missed telling stories. I missed speaking. I wasn't speaking as much because I was working with clients so much. And so just around that time, luck would have it, and I'll tell you exactly what that means later in the speech. There we go. I got the opportunity to write the Shark Tank book for ABC, and I got the opportunity to spend time with the sharks and meet tremendous entrepreneurs from all over the country. I was on set for season 5. It was really great, and I learned a lot. For the last 7 years, you have to remember, my degree is not in business. My degree is in musical theater, right? All the knowledge I have was learned from reading, from writing, from watching, from trying, from a lot of failing, which we'll talk about later. But everything I learned was from really smart people who were generous enough to share it. Like I said, I've worked with tons of great companies, tons of influential thought leaders, and I want to share some of the most important lessons and some of the stories that I've had the honor of telling with you tonight. So let's start. I'm going to break it down to 10 things. And I've told someone to watch if I run over time. You just let me know. You good? All right, you're my timekeeper. All right, do 10% more. Right, so 10 things we're going to talk about. First one, do 10% more. This is something I learned actually really on. My father runs his own business, and growing up, my dad said, if there's 2 things you do to get ahead in your career, it's this. Have a really great attitude, be great to work with, and just do 10% more. Anything you're doing, just multiply it, 10%. And when you're a teenager and you hear that, you're sort of like, all right, can I have the keys to the car? You're not really listening. But as I advanced in my career and as I grew up, I started to realize this 10% rule was actually right. And I started to see it all around me. In high school, I weighed about 90 pounds more than I do, right? And so I wish I had a picture of that. I'll show you. I have one in my wallet. How I lost all that weight was that principle. Just do 10% more of what they told me to do. Go on the treadmill for 60 minutes. I'll go for 66, right? I applied that method to losing weight, and it worked. And the same thing is true in the business world. You see it everywhere. On Shark Tank, if you're a Shark Tank fan, that's Jim and Sabin. They run a company called Cousin's Maine Lobster, right? So they sell lobster from a food truck in Los Angeles, and I think a little bit in Maine as well now. And when I was interviewing them for the book and spending time with them, more than anyone else, they really sort of embodied this idea of always doing 10%. Every entrepreneur that's been on Shark Tank has a story about how they got on the show, what the experience was like, what the shark said to them. But I'd never heard this kind of story before. Before getting on the show, they watched every episode of every season. So I think they were on season 4. So they would have watched every episode of 1, 2, and 3. Let's call it 50 or 60 episodes. And they wrote down every question the sharks had asked on all of the episodes, on all of the seasons, and then came up with 2 answers for each question so that they would each have an answer. Now, this is probably more than 10%, honestly, but you get the point. And so when they walked in the tank, every question that could possibly be asked, they had an answer for. They had 2 good answers for. And if you watch the episode, you don't realize it, but they'd only been in business for like 7 weeks before they went on the show, and they got an investment, which is crazy. And it's because anyone can do that. Everyone has access to all the episodes. Anyone can sit down and put the time in and do it. Most people don't. They did, they got a deal. And I think that's a really great example of how pushing just a little bit more each time can get you so much further ahead. Number 2. All right, here we go. Have a plan, but know when to change course. So as I've worked with a lot of different kinds of businesses and a lot of different kinds of business leaders, I've realized that most people fall into sort of 1 or 2 spots. They're either like me, which is someone who's very type A, left brain. I love like lists. Who loves like lists and checklists? And yeah, you're into that? Oh, we should start a club. We have a club. Here it is. We should start a subcommittee. So I'm one of those people. I love rules, order, boundaries. I need context in order to be creative. And then you have the other people, the poets, the artists. Even when I was an artist, I wasn't much of an artist. The poets, the artists, the blank space, the open canvas, that's where they're creative. Well, neither of us are entirely correct. As it turns out, from what I've seen, the answer is sort of in the middle. You have to be able to plan. You have to be able to think strategically. But you also have to know when it's time to make that hard left and when it's time to change the plan entirely. A great example of that is Robert Herjavec from the show. So probably 4 times a day, someone says to me like, "What are the sharks like?" Or, which shark is your favorite? Is Kevin really that mean? And that's what I get a lot. And I give them different answers. But the one thing that's true is that Robert is different than all of the other sharks you see on the show. And I felt that he was actually my first interview with them. And I felt that he was a little different as I started to speak with all the other sharks. And what I realized was that Robert will say time and time again, he never, ever wanted to be an entrepreneur. He had no interest in starting a business. He had no interest in going out on his own. He still says it today. He's not a very good entrepreneur. He's a better manager. But what happened was he had to change the course because the plan wasn't working out. He got hired to be the president of a small technology company. And after an investor had made a large investment, he kicked him out and he put his son in charge. Right? Now, Robert had just gotten married. He had all these bills. He had all this debt. And he had just been fired for this guy's son. So he was really disappointed. He said he was going to leave. And the guy said, "You can't leave. You have to stay on and you have to run sales or I'm going to sue you for $5 million. And I don't know what the charge was. Probably, I don't actually, he didn't tell me. So $5 million, I'm going to sue you if you leave. He didn't believe it. He walked out the door and left. That afternoon, he gets home, lawyer, $5 million. He was being sued. So he didn't know what he was going to do. He had no money. He had just gotten married. He had no prospects. So he decided, you know what I'm going to do? I can't get hired by anyone right now. I'm going to just start my own thing and see what happens. He started his own company, which is crazy if you think about it, but anyone who started their company knows it's not the fastest way to make money. He started his own company, and not only that, he didn't want to give his employer the satisfaction of high legal fees. So during the nights, he taught himself law and defended himself in court. No joke, he won. So he taught himself law, he started his own company, and as it turned out, he realized he was a pretty smart guy, and he could run his own company. And so he completely changed the course of his life and went that way, because that was the smarter way to go. And I think that is such an important lesson. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're innovating from within, even if you're just entrepreneurial, it's something we all have to realize, and we all have to accept and practice. I love this quote that Robert says, "We always overestimate what we can achieve in 1 year and underestimate what we can achieve in 10. And I think that has a lot to do with this principle, that we plan, that we think we know, and that we're unable to recognize the opportunity when it's right there. I think it's an important thing he has to say. I'm going to tell you a little story about planning myself. So my business is different than a lot of people here. My business is basically me. Right? Like what you see, like this is what they buy. So if I'm speaking, or if I'm consulting, or if I'm writing, or if I'm doing broadcast stuff, what you're purchasing is this guy right here. And so me sort of looking at my business and planning for the future is a little different. But every year, I put this little MPD annual roadmap together, and I plan out I look back at the year prior first, and then I plan out what I think the next year is going to look like. What are the opportunities? Where am I going to spend my time? Every single year, I'm dead wrong. So I don't know what that says about me. Maybe I'm not a very good planner as I thought I was, but the point is that the reason why I'm wrong is that in my line of work, random opportunities happen a lot, and you can't plan for everything. So I think it's so important to know how to think like a planner, to know what direction you're going, but also to know when it's time to take that hard left. Number 3, let passion be an ingredient, not the recipe. So when I was on set with the Sharks, I had an opportunity to speak with them as a group, which was really interesting because they all have very different opinions about a lot of different things. And the number one subject that was the most controversial of all of the subjects was not financials, was not valuation, was not marketing, branding, passion. Passion. This one little topic spurred so much dialogue and fighting, and the conversation was around what role should passion have when you're building a business or when you're working in business. Should you start a company based on a passion? Lori really believes that. Should you follow your effort? Should you follow where your work is going, what Mark Cuban believes? Or, as Kevin says, and of course you would expect him to say this, some entrepreneurs use passion as an excuse to avoid focusing on performance metrics. So is passion a distraction? It's tough. And it depends on the person, it depends on the business owner, and how you view passion. And quite frankly, I don't think I figured out the answer, and I don't know if anyone has, because passion is so different. But I have figured out a motto that I sort of live by, and that's really helped me. And I've learned from these guys. That's a brain, by the way. And it's a pretty bad drawing. I didn't draw it. And the idea is this: passion should fuel you, and strategy should rule.